He said Diotrephes was one of the leaders in a local congregation. His vision of the church was that it was a small community of faithful people that protected itself from a scary outside world. On the inside of the community, the people loved God and they loved each other, but they were afraid of the impact of the outside world. In this view, the church exists for the benefit of those who are already members. At that time, nearly a generation after the death of the earliest apostles, there were lots of itinerant preachers who would go around spreading the gospel and starting new churches. These preachers would get support from the existing churches, but Diotrephes would not give the traveling preachers any help and would not even put them up overnight. The elders said that it was evil, that what Diotrephes was doing was evil. The elder's vision of the church, that is John the elder, was that it was an on-fire mission to evangelize the world. All those who were doing evangelism, even if it meant they were making sacrifices and taking risks to do so, must do so. Now, I titled this Three Congregations. You just heard about one, and a couple of visions that were around the world at that time. Now I want to talk about two congregations that were very important in my own development of ministry. The first was, well, let me back up a little before. About 1870 or so, along in there, the city of Santa Cruz decided to expand by annexing a very large section of land up to the north and west of the existing city. And so they did so, and the developers began to make plans for development of subdivisions. One developer had a great idea. The city of Pacific Grove today originally was the summer conference grounds for the Methodist churches in Northern California. He thought it would be good if he could find a church that wanted to make their summer conference grounds there at Santa Cruz. And lo and behold, he found one. And it was called the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And so he gave property to our churches in Northern California to be developed into a summer conference ground. In 1 year, our state evangelist was able to raise $16,500 to build a tabernacle in the center of what were to be a series of circles. And people would then be coming to Santa Cruz. Many of them, especially in places like Sacramento and Stockton and Modesto and Fresno, would be building summer homes in those circles around there, and would in that way help to develop the property. And so it was. And they built and dedicated a tabernacle that would seat 2,000 people there in the middle of those circles. The inner circle was called Eric's Circle, after one of our early second generation evangelists, Isaac Eric. And on the outside and the grounds around the tabernacle, families would come and camp. The state convention in those days lasted 8 days. It started on Sunday and ended on Sunday, and there was lots of good fellowship, good eating. People came and stayed in the homes of their friends that were being built around the circle, and the fellowship was really great. Well, that went on until in 1907, a group of people from First Christian Church in Santa Cruz, which was downtown, went out and established a church across which, in this Garfield Park area, incidentally named after President Garfield, who was a disciple preacher and the president of our Hiram College in Ohio. And They organized a congregation. They asked our state board if they could use the tabernacle while they developed the congregation, and they were told, yes, you may do so. So a group of a few people met in that building that could seat 2,000, and for 7 years while they got ready to build a church, which turned out to be right across the street. And they named themselves the Garfield Park Christian Church. That's where I was baptized. And I have kind of kept track of that. And I was baptized in 1932. And I've kind of kept track of that church over the years since then. It happened that the tabernacle was burned down in an arson fire in 1935. And for a number of years, it sat there, the property unused, and everybody wondering, what are we going to do with it? And finally, the Garfield Park Church and our state board made an agreement that the property would be turned over to them, and a new church built on the property where the tabernacle had been, which they did. They just didn't build a church right in the center of it, like the tabernacle had been. And then a strange thing happened. In the early 1950s and 60s, the hippie movement came in rather heavily around Santa Cruz, and the population of Santa Cruz developed into two competing and conflicting groups: the hippies and the townies. Those were already there, and each one wished the other would disappear, and they didn't care how. And so they built the church, a new church there, a very adequate building. And the first thing early they found out was that people were, homeless people were beginning to camp overnight around the church. And then on those grounds that were not being used for anything else. And they considered, what should we do? So they felt like they had a ministry on their front porch, practically. And they opened up the church and they began offering services to these people. And they offered food, job training, overnight inside rather than outside. And the two groups began to merge together rather well. In 2007, in November, my two daughters and I attended the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Garfield Park Christian Church. At communion time, the two elders were two women, one white, one black. One a descendant of early settlers who had run a dairy and who I had known since birth, since her birth. And the other, one of the homeless people that the church had served and had made a part of their congregation. I received communion for the first time in my life by a hippie. And there were quite a few of them in that congregation. And they have continued to minister to those people down through the years. Now, a ministry that God had given them right on their front porch. And they just recently started up a ministry to the students at the University of California campus there in Santa Cruz. And it's been a joy to follow the development of that congregation. Well, about a year or so after I was baptized, we moved to Oakland, where my father was asked to be the pastor of the Fruitvale Christian Church. It had something of a similar beginning. The city of Oakland in the late 19th century annexed what had been a fruit growing area just outside of the city, and they named it, believe it or not, Fruitvale. And put down the streets and subdivisions came in. And our state board organized, our state evangelists came in and organized a new church there to serve that community. In that history, they were, I think, one of the most excellent examples of what a neighborhood church really is that I have ever seen. We didn't have a parking lot because we had no parking problems. People either walked or rode the streetcar to church. What parking there was on the street was plenty adequate. We had a youth group there that numbered about 40 that met regularly on Sunday as Christian Endeavor. There were, I would say, about 20 who were what I would call the core group, and we all kind of grew up together. And were very active in interchurch affairs and so on as well. And during those years, it was a real service to the community. They had built a new building on the corner, and so the old sanctuary was moved to the back and converted to a gymnasium. And we had that gymnasium active 6 nights a week. And the only reason it wasn't open on Saturday was because the custodian had to get it ready for Sunday school on Sunday morning. Congregation had numbered about 400 all down through the years, and very, very active. Well, after the war, the population there began to change, just like it did in Santa Cruz. Only the people looked different. They talked a kind of a different language. The leadership of the congregation, who were the people my age, had all gotten married and had moved out to Castro Valley and San Lorenzo area. And the church just kind of sat there wondering what they should do. Well, in 1950, I was in summer school at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, and one of the ladies in the church kept kind of correspondence with me every month or so. And I got a letter from her, and I was sitting there at the lunch table where we were living, and Virginia was across the table from me, and I was reading the letter. And in the letter she said, we had a congregational meeting yesterday. She wrote this on Monday. Hugh McCallum was their pastor, and she said, Reverend McCallum proposed to us 2 possible futures for our congregation. One was that we would stay here and that we would develop a program that would meet the needs of the people who were now moving into this area, because many had moved out and the new population was coming in. Or the other possibility was that we move out to Castro Valley, where there was no congregation at the time and where the church leadership, a lot of them were, and develop a congregation there. She said, we voted to do neither. I looked over at it and I said, they just signed the death warrant. And that's what happened. They decided to separate themselves from the community. They continued to meet, but they made no contact with people who were moving in. And slowly, it took them about 45 years. They died without a whimper. And as I looked at 3 John, I saw there the 2 examples out of my own experience of those 2 churches that the author John was talking about. Brookville Christian Church ceased to exist a number of years ago. Today, the building that they had is occupied by a Spanish-speaking congregation who seem to be doing quite well. But nobody remembers when they finally closed the doors at Food Rock Christian Church for the last time. It just went out without a whimper. So it seemed to me that those were two good examples of congregations out of my own experience of what John the Elder is talking about. And I think the congregation that we do not want to be is Diotrephes.
Amen.